Hello, commentary fans. This is Mike again, and I am back with you for the next commentary. Today, we're going to be looking at another horror film in the Universal cycle, but not really of the traditional Dracula, Frankenstein, Wolfman series. We're going to be looking at the 1935 movie The Raven today, and it's pretty good. I've chosen it as kind of another example of a great Bela Lugosi role, and it's partners him up with Karloff in a really interesting collaboration, which I think is pretty unique in terms of comparing it to the other films they did together, and just to the general myths and ideas that people have about their relationship and the kind of roles they were often teamed up together as. I am paused on the Universal logo flying around the globe, and I'm going to start the film in 3, 2, and 1, as always. Here we see the Lemley era plane flying around with it saying a Universal picture, and this is really the end of the Lemley era. I believe this might be their last horror film. Oh, actually it's not, but it's pretty close to the end. You just saw there that it's billed as Karloff, of course, who was so famous that you didn't even have to say it was starring Boris Karloff. And if you noticed, there it also just says Lugosi. It doesn't say Bela ahead of that. And really, what a thrill seeing that as a Lugosi fan. I mean, I'm sure it must have been a thrill for Lugosi as well. You know, that he finally was able to get a certain degree of respectability to the point where he could just be called Lugosi. I've got a reprint poster of this, and in the middle of his name it says Bela Dracula Lugosi. Here we're introduced to Irene Ware, who plays Jean Thatcher, the heroine of this movie, who finds herself as the object of Lugosi's affections and lust. And she's pretty good in the movie. It goes right into the action. She falls off a cliff there. It's kind of a fun moment. This is the third in a series of films based off of the work of Edgar Allan Poe. And I use that term pretty loosely, simply because I think, obviously, you look at this movie, and it's not The Raven, the story of, the man sitting in his chambers, being haunted by the raven and bringing back memories of his lost Lenore. Universal did a series of 3 Poe films, and I think they're interesting to look at because, none of them are very good adaptations of Poe. And I think the temptation into adapting Poe is the fact that his works are in, public domain. They don't have to pay rights for them. And that you can sort of, since they're shorter stories and poems, that you're able to have a degree of freedom in creating that. And then, I think Universal used Poe as a sort of easy way out, in a way, I think, like, if they, and this is just my personal theory on things, I think that Universal saw Poe as a good way to lend credibility to a project. Obviously, the name Edgar Allan Poe has a great deal of, it needs no introduction. It's kind of the figure that's synonymous with horror. And I think I like these Universal Poe adaptations in a way because they're pretty far off from Poe, the source material, but they're the most vastly original horror films. We just missed the introduction to Lugosi's character, Richard Vollin. He's a brilliant surgeon, and he's obsessed with Poe, and we saw Lugosi deliver a little bit of the famous Poe poem there. And this film is pretty interesting, and it's good in the sense that it's a sort of the first meta horror film in a way. It's the horror film that it's a horror story that sort of knows it's a horror story. There's always a certain argument or what have you is if you sort of watched or consume too much horror stories, if you sort of emulate those thoughts and behaviors, and there's been a few horror films that sort of explore that in a lot of ways. And I know recently we've had the Scream sort of horror films that parody this idea, but this is really the first sort of story that goes into it. You have Vollin here, who's sort of lost in his own fantasy world, and he is so obsessed with Poe that it comes to the point where he tries to emulate him, and it's a good idea for a story if you do it right. And obviously there's a lot of humor in that kind of meta horror story because it sort of pokes at what makes a horror story, and so it's very aware. And there's moments in here where it's aware as well. Here we're introduced to Samuel Hines as Judge Thatcher, Jean's father, who's pleading with Dr. Vollin to save his daughter's life and perform a risky surgery on her. You probably recognize him. He's a character actor that appears in hundreds of these movies. I don't know about hundreds, it seems like hundreds, but he's in a lot of classic movies from around this time. He's probably most famous, I would say, for appearing in It's a Wonderful Life as George Bailey's father. And he sort of serves as the antagonist of this picture. Or I don't know, he's not the antagonist at all. He's probably Lugosi's antagonist, is what I really meant to say. This is an interesting sequence, the operation. They sort of frame it really well. There's a beautiful look at Lugosi's eyes there. So they're so powerful, you forget in some ways. And it frames them pretty well, like they do in Dracula. Here we have Lugosi at the organ, sort of playing away and giving an ominous sort of feel to the picture. This film, unsurprisingly, is... I know I brought up the sort of end of the first horror cycle, and this film bears a lot of the responsibility for ending the horror films. Almost a god taint of human emissions. I mean, this film, like, one thing you really have to give to its credit is that it doesn't go for subtlety at all. it really goes all out with what it says. Some of the dialogue, obviously, that line there is pretty far out there. And like this is an interesting performance to look at Lugosi with. Um, he really goes all out. And we'll see later on. Like, I know some people, I've read some the detractors of this films say Lugosi even goes over the top. I mean, I recently saw a review of it, which I disagreed with, where they compared it to the Ed Wood caliber performance of Lugosi. But I don't really agree with that. This is certainly, there's some credibility to the argument that he goes over the top, but he's very good in the film. And what I would say, oh, here we have this sort of big stage piece. Once upon a midnight jury. I don't know the poem. Can't keep up with it. But here we have Gene Thatcher sort of doing a dance interpretation of it, and this is heartbreaking right now. We see this scene is taking place in Soundstage 28. Lugosi is sitting in one of the opera boxes there, and boy, they really hit it home, don't they? It's a dance interpretation, but it doesn't look, I don't know, it doesn't remind me very much of Edgar Allan Poe or The Raven, but, this is it's still a great scene, though. You look at Lugosi's face there, it delivers the intent perfectly. I mean, like I was saying earlier, that this film doesn't go in for subtlety. It's good to see that in Lugosi's non-verbal acting there. He really looks all out. I love his Lugosi's when he smiles, because you see it's not really a full smile. It looks like a man here trying to utmost restrain himself from smiling, and you see Judge Thatcher there sort of realize that something is up there. There we have Gene's fiance, who really, that's one of the things about these films, that's kind of goofy. You see, they're never quite as interesting as, or charismatic as the Lugosi character. This is a great scene, and Lugosi's thick accent really drives it home. And you see, like, the face there on the Judge Thatcher character goes, oh, no, something's definitely up here.
I told you never to come into this room unless I sent for you. I'm sorry, sir.
One of the things that the film is sort of tries to do is sort of loosely tie it into The Raven, in the sense that you have Vollin here, who has his own personal interpretations about Poe. He sort of views him as something of a madman who is, like The Raven is about a madman who is tortured, and thus he must torture others to drive it out of his system. And I know that's a popular interpretation with Edgar Allan Poe, and it definitely adds to the mythos sort of surrounding him.
worry me.
And it's a clever idea to really for this film.
Then I
And that's one of the things I really like about the Poe films with
danger of becoming
Universal made instead of
that you saved her life, Dr. Vollin.
the ones that had been since, is that
Dr. Vollin.
they really, sort of take the themes of the story and create their own horror stories around them.
Yeah, you know the genes
And
engaged in Jerry Foreman.
that's,
Now, we can't let her get any ideas about you, can we? You are saying, Judge Thatcher, the gene has fallen in love with me. No, I'm not quite saying that. But you do not approve.
one of the things Lugosi does in this scene, which I really, really love, is he's got that
Falling in love with you?
test tube there, and you see Lugosi on his face. He's very restrained,
This time,
but you see the sort of the fury bellow under there, and he crushes that test tube there. It's a great example of his nonverbal sort of acting there.
I'm sorry you feel like this. Now,
The conflict, this film is pretty
for her to marry Gordon.
condensed in that
Jean's life, if we're going to sacrifice her happiness.
sort of condensed in, in like the sort of the runtime, and so they really have to really streamline everything, and so
I'm a man who renders
this sort of
humanity
conflict comes out of nowhere in some ways,
My brain must be clear.
and
My hand sure.
I don't know, we'll see, but here there's the
It's coming to my life.
example of how the Raven is connected. This idea of obsession and how
You know what you're saying.
they sort of go into the fact that Vollin is
And I tell you, the only way
great scientist, and that the only way
I came here with
he can do his work is if his brain and heart are clear, and the way he does it is, like Poe, and how the hero of the Raven is tormented by the loss of Lenore. That he needs his mind clear, and thus he must win back Jean. And here we have the first introduction of Karloff's character. And, Karloff really in this film is nothing more than the sidekick to Lugosi. And I know, I almost get a sort of perverse enjoyment out of that. I make no apologies or reservations. I am a Lugosi fan. And part of the dynamic of being a Lugosi fan is obviously the constant comparisons to Karloff, and it's not really fair at all, because I'm sure, I love Karloff too, and I'm sure every Lugosi fan doesn't hate Karloff, but it's just so kind of unfair how people perceive Lugosi's character and his just Lugosi in general. All the stories about the jealousy and about the perceived inferiority, and then you see a movie like The Raven, where you have Karloff and Lugosi, and then in some of the films they've done together, obviously Karloff's character has greater emphasis, even to the point where Lugosi is kind of reduced to nothing but a sidekick or a side character. But in this one, it's completely Lugosi getting center stage and Karloff taking second fiddle. And Karloff he's good in this film. He's really he's really just sort of playing the sort of typical Karloff character, like similar, I would say, to the monsters sort of archetype. Karloff Bateman's character says that he's ugly, and that his ugliness makes him do ugly things, and that's sort of the storyline of the monster. You know, the idea of wanting to be accepted and society sort of throwing him to the side, and, you know, that rejection driving him to do horrible things. And it's a good character, though. Karloff doesn't throw it away at all. And you know, he's well teamed with Lugosi in this film. And you know, he and Lugosi always have a great deal of chemistry together. Everybody looks at me and says, "You're ugly." Makes me feel mean.
Why are you telling me this? I'm not interested in your life story.
Oh, here we have
Say not.
Lugosi's Vollin sort of
Maybe if a man looks at me, he does
exposes Bateman's sort of frailty and his sort of weakness. You are saying something very profound.
A man with a face
So hideously ugly.
ugly.
Will do ugly things.
Don't ask me for this job, because I don't want to do them
Things no more.
Fix me so I
This is sort of a reversal of The Black Cat, which this film is often compared to and sort of used as a companion piece in a way too. In that film, Lugosi is sort of the tragic hero. Neither men are good men. They both have sort of evil past, but in The Black Cat and with Lugosi, he wants to move past that. And in this film, it's sort of Karloff taking that role, and they counter someone who's pretty much pure evil, and it's really just a matter of sort of what kind of character you prefer. Frankly, I think The Black Cat is the better film. I mean, I love The Black Cat. I'm sure we'll get to it. It's probably my favorite film that they did together, and it's quickly kind of become my favorite Universal film. But I use this one in comparison to it, and that this one I think is a little safer because you know, there's always Karloff. He doesn't really, I don't think, feel at his best when he's playing pure evil, like Lugosi does. Obviously, Lugosi, the Dracula connotation. You know, the fact that when you look at Dracula and you think about him, there's always sort of malevolence to the character that Lugosi obviously portrays it, that he enjoys that malevolent factor. And Karloff, you know, with the monster, there's good underneath, and so this film's a little safer. But it's not to say that the characterizations are completely similar to the point where they're boring, because they aren't. Karloff certainly isn't never boring, and Lugosi, he really goes all out with this performance. Like, he's, I think, able to be a little louder here, and so it's worth seeing. And it's, you know, it's worth seeing, like, the nuances of the character.
I will not need you at the market. Have a pleasant holiday.
the whole film from this point on sort of becomes a haunted house picture. You know, Vollin plans to invite Thatcher and his friends to his house so he can torture them at his Poe devices. Here we have the reveal of the horrible thing that Vollin has done to Bateman's face. It's another makeup by Jack Pierce, but I think I don't know if people agree with me or not. It's just my personal opinion. But this could easily be in the conversation for Jack Pierce's, I don't know what would you call it, his worst. Probably, I don't know if it's his worst. It's well imagined enough. But it's definitely the most artificial and fake looking of Jack Pierce's makeup. They do a trick with Karloff's eye, which is very noticeable because the eye looks so fake looking. I don't know what it is. It's sort of plastic. It's meant to look as though it's dried up. You know, there's definitely something to say about, I know in the last few films, Man of a Thousand Faces and Ghost of Frankenstein, we've discussed how makeup works and with it, and I generally have said that the best makeups are the kind that don't constrict the actor's face, where they can still use their face to act and portray character. And this film, I think it's not a very good practical makeup in that Karloff's eye isn't able to relay emotions. This is a great sequence here. I'm sorry I'm sort of losing my train of thought, but it's where Lugosi completely reveals what he's done to the Bateman character. And with all those mirrors moving to the side, and Karloff shoots all of them because he's so haunted by his ugly face. And you have Lugosi sort of going all out there, laughing at what he's done there. I mean, you know, as I was saying, Karloff even doing a monster grunt there. As I was saying, it's satisfying. I don't know, like sort of the fan, and yeah, kind of like seeing Lugosi decimate Karloff like that. Oh man. Look at that smile on Lugosi's face, you know. As I was saying earlier, that's one of the great things about it's one of the great things about his acting there. His smile is always so creepy. He's going to blackmail Karloff's character.
First, you must do this job for me, Bateman. I can't use my hand to do it. Your hand is used to torture.
Your hand is used to torture. Your hand must do it. My brain, your hand. That's sort of an interesting element of the Karloff-Lugosi dynamic, too. I like the fact that Lugosi brings up the fact, my brain and your hand, and, you know, it sort of goes into the images that people perceive with the character, and it really it all comes down to Dracula and Frankenstein. Frankenstein, and obviously is a very physical monster, very rough around the edges monster. You know, he's sort of a brute, and I think that a lot of people look at Karloff and they sort of see that in his performances, and his best roles are the ones where that image is played up, I think, in some ways. That's not to say that Karloff couldn't play an aristocratic character, which, Lugosi was so good at. And on the other hand of the spectrum, with Lugosi, being the brain to the hands. In fact, that's another reason why I really like The Black Cat, because Karloff is playing the aristocratic character there. But that's one of the strengths of this film. Here we have Irene Ware again. We have Irene Ware again as Jean, and going into sort of the discussions I sort of have looking at the female characters of these stories. I really like her performance here, especially in this part where she sort of thinks Vollin's kind of still a good guy. She's pretty fun and fiery, and that's what I like about. I mean, that's what I think are the best characters in these. I mean, best female characters, because they don't. They don't seem to be as much property, but certainly that's what Vollin thinks of her. Here's a great part of the film. Vollin is hosting the party, and he's got some really ditzy guests here. It's so fun. It's like, this is where the movie sort of gets its comedic elements, which are really pretty good, because you have Lugosi's Vollin, who, pretty much anyone with a keen eye can see is kind of stark raving mad, and he's hosting a party, trying to be a sociable host, and out comes Karloff as Bateman, who he's got dressed up as a tuxedo and masking around as his butler. And Lugosi, like the ditzy friends here, this guy saying, "No, no, my pet." It's so funny, just like what you get, like what you see with this character, you'd expect him not to have any friends at all, least of all these real loud characters. That's a great shot, the introduction of Karloff, the way he walks in, and as I was saying about the use of the face, Karloff does use the face sort of well, in that he's so blank and he's sort of expressionless with that horrible mouth open. But I also like the way he uses his body, Karloff. He really walks well and has great nonverbal acting. There's definitely a sense in the fact that I think he brings some of the Frankenstein to this role, like the idea that the dead are so restrained at their muscles, and it's really unsettling. We have Judge Thatcher entering the party, and it's really something. Another moment where Karloff enters and totally scares the Jean Thatcher there.
What was it? I was standing in my room looking in the mirror when the door opened and an awful-looking man came in.
Oh, you mean my servant, the poor fella. Come on, let's sit down. I will tell you about
Here we have Lugosi. He's going to tell about the servant, and it's just another part of the film where it kind of goes into him playing this role of the host. And
He can tell the way he
one
looks.
thing about
Arab bandits took him a prisoner.
here we have him going into another World War I story.
Equal veteran.
And he's going into his
Why your extraordinary...
story about torture, like
The Raven.
What is the raven?
story about torture driving this character, and he brings up his raven there and tells them all that it's his talisman.
What is your interpretation?
And we're going into his interpretation of the raven. Like I was going into earlier, I don't really think this is all that great an interpretation of Edgar Allan Poe, but you know, it's an original one, and it does its job in coming or you know, sort of playing with the story, and tying the macabre aspects of the character. Universal really tried to market this film as, you know, being very faithful to the spirit of Edgar Allan Poe. You know, I've heard that they tried to market the film to, you know, literary students, saying that all the all the high school students studying Poe should go and see it and enhance their appreciation of things. There's a good moment there where Lugosi's character explains that he's a doctor because he's so fascinated in the idea of how much pain and torture someone can endure. There's the Colonel and someone, his name is Pinky, I guess. Oh man, I love those characters. They're really, really good. They might be my favorite sort of side comedic characters in these kind of films. And just the idea that Lugosi's Vollin, who has his own Poe torture chamber, is even acquaintance with them.
You came into the room so suddenly. Thankfully, if I
Here's another reason why I really like this Irene Ware character. She goes up to Karloff's Bateman and tells him that she's sorry. You know, it's not often in these sort of films that you see the character like that recognizing that the person who is so hideously ugly isn't a monster. It was usually up to the audience to do it themselves. And, you know, I think that is a smart decision because it adds to Karloff's performance. You know, the fact that he comes into the picture talking about how ugly he is, and you know how horrible it makes him feel, and then you see someone look past his ugliness. I love the look on Karloff's eyes there, and the way he uses his hand. It really shows why I think Karloff was so great at conveying these characters.
Grown-up people. When a perfectly reputable and distinguished surgeon talks about...
And then we have Samuel Hines. He knows that something immediately is up. He talks as if we're all going to get killed during the middle of the night.
Get out of here.
Here, even Karloff tries to warn them.
What are you doing here? Go downstairs.
He really uses his body pretty well. I mean, you could almost do this character, Karloff. He's so good. You could almost do this without really an extensive Jack Pierce makeup job. You know, body language could do so much to kind of add the sinister edge or the kind of the character. Obviously, you know, Karloff's character is so scarred here. They could do that. I mean, he could have done that without that makeup. But obviously, I think part of it was people were always sort of expecting a new Karloff to performance to go into the grotesqueries, and obviously, Karloff and Jack Pierce worked so well together that you know, it was part of the appeal of these pictures. Here we go into Lugosi finally showcasing his torture chamber, and I think those are remnants of this set from Frankenstein, sort of the stairway down there. We see the torture chamber in full effect. And, you know, these are sort of the appeal of this sort of horror film, like these images of these torture chambers. You know, audiences, like, I know I bring this up all the time, but by 1935, certainly everything was brought up a little higher, and, you know, seeing a full torture chamber and just, you know, not even seeing these things in use, but, you know, like seeing them just there was been so shocking and terrifying. And, you know, it's almost better that you don't it's almost better that you don't see them in use, because then the audience can use their imagination, and that's you know, part of the that's part of the appeal of the Pit and the Pendulum story. You know, the idea that just the thought of that pendulum finally coming down and slicing the person open is so scary. And, you know, that's really done well in this picture here. You know, you have Lugosi so arrogantly stand in there, and Karloff traps him there. And all Lugosi has to do is say, remind him that unless you release me, you remain the hideous monster that you are.
Come on, Bateman.
I love the shots of Karloff looking there with his one good eye staring back and forth as the pendulum swings. Try to remember, should anything happen to me, the hideous monster that you are.
Come on, Bateman.
You know, seeing these torture devices in this film really, I think, might have been the last straw in some ways. We've sort of talked about that before, obviously, going back into the idea that some of these horror films, as they progressed, sort of led to that first period where there was no horror for a few years because of the ban in England. And this film, like Mark of the Vampire, which we've already discussed before, is definitely an example of it. Definitely an example of it. I think sort of, you know, there's something especially terrifying. I think the reason that this film was so sort of controversial is because of the image of that pendulum at the end of it. Because, you know, there's something viscerally terrifying about being cut, I think. It's really extreme, and
I saw a man coming up through the floor.
it just is really must have been too much, I'd imagine. And so you have even this point is very much a high point in Lugosi's career, but obviously it was such a high point in horror that it just was a little too much in a way. That's just the way it is.
I guess Daddy was right after all. We probably should have gone home.
Don't be silly.
At least this leading man here isn't
Not frightened.
David Manners. He's sort of spunky.
What did you mean, Steve? The third floor.
Yeah, Karloff doesn't. Well,
You were looking for the girl.
he does a lot with his character, but he doesn't really have a lot of vocalization or extreme movement in the film. He is just sort of there, and there's a moment I forgot. He's got a horse crop that he beats Karloff with. I mean, how satisfying is that as a Lugosi fan? And we have the Colonel coming in his pajamas. They want a sleeping powder. And he walks in on him beating Karloff. And of course, you think something sinister is going to happen, but it really pays off at the end. Like, these people are just two kind of clueless bystanders to all this terror that's happening. And he closes the door in the middle of it. Such a nice, thoughtful man. Oh man, good horror films know when to have that sort of moment of brevity to sort of get you out of it and get you, to a little laugh in between all the terror. And I definitely think this film, there was a need for that, obviously, because, there's such an extreme torture scene. There isn't a whole lot of horror. There's a lot of setup in this, and we're finally getting into the action of things. One of the things I think is sort of a trap of these haunted house films is when there's too much build up or too little too little characterization. And in this film you're very fortunate in that you have Lugosi. There's some beautiful sets in this movie. It feels like a fully realized sort of haunted house. It fully feels like it's a realized house. There's a continuity sort of in the set. And then, of course, the torture chambers are remarkable to look at as well. Now, I can see that you can hardly stand on your feet. Bateman, see that Judge Thatcher lies down. This has a pretty decent soundtrack, too. I don't believe it's original music, at least it feels like it's classical, and if it is original, it copies it pretty well. That's one thing that I think the film, or at least the
Try to be sane, Robin. I'm the sanest man.
or at least I think that the film could have done more, is you actually get the feeling that the pendulum actually descends. It's just this one stock shot there of it, and then he's sort of going to close-ups, but maybe that would have been a little too much. I don't think I've ever seen a film where the pendulum actually goes down and cuts through the person. Maybe I have. I mean, just like, that's not really all that satisfying. Just the thought of it is so satisfying. And then we missed a good moment in that scene where Thatcher says, "Oh, try to be sane, Vollin. I'm the sanest man that ever lived." That's really the only torture device you actually see in the film, aside from that one sequence earlier. Oh, they do a good job here, sort of showing everything, how it works. It's quite a contraption, this house. I don't think that they had a way to do that with, to actually, have that set on an elevator. I wonder how they did that. Don't be alarmed, I have a pleasant surprise for you.
Jeffrey! Wake up, Jeffrey! They've got Jean!
Oh, Jeffrey is one of the other guests. He's not the colonel and his wife. They kind of are just introduced to the film so that there isn't a them by themselves. But you see the pendulum swinging there, and one of the things that I think could have made the film a little stronger in a way is had at the end of the film one of the villains was punished by the pendulum. There's a lot of gadgets in this house. It's not a sort of a traditional haunted house film, and this sort of appeared in a few films, like at this time. Karloff made one called The Night Key, I believe it was called, that had that as a premise. The one I was thinking of was The Man That Could Not Hang, where Karloff is resurrected from the dead, and it's sort of similar to this one, where he invites a group of people that wronged him and sentenced him to death to this house party where he plans to systematically sort of torture them in the same way. Here's another sort of great moment that sort of highlights Karloff's performance in that film, where, yes, I know I'm ugly.
I'm ugly. He did it.
Dr. Vollin?
He did it.
Oh, he's mad. What will he do to me?
He won't hurt you.
Will you help me? You will help me, won't you? You'll help me get out of here?
No.
Yeah, you see a little bit of traces of the monster's voice in this film, where he says, "No, no." This is the same year, of course, that Bride of Frankenstein came out, 1935. And, this one actually sort of feels sort of relatively tame in comparison to what they did in that film. I mean, this one is just more visceral terror, and a lot of the terror in Bride of Frankenstein, or not even the terror, the subversiveness of that film sort of had to do with you know, the undertones, especially the blasphemy of it. Yeah, that pendulum isn't descending at all. Uh, that pendulum isn't descending at all. I mean, just the idea of it was horrible enough. Eh, there's the illusion of it descending.
The servant must have the key. Gene! Gene! Gene!
Don't worry, he'll kill you.
Nathan, bring him here.
These are great sets.
Just in time to be witnesses to a wedding ceremony.
Yeah, this is the grand plan for what he plans to be rid of Jean and his fiance there. He wants to put them in a torture room where they it's one of the sort of crushing rooms, you know. I don't know what you'd call it. I'll be the sanest man who ever lived. That's a line that all insane people say. One of the things I think that this film has here, one of its problems is bringing up this ending, which is the crushing room, which I think is kind of anticlimactic. You know, you see the pendulum, which is such a strong visual cue, and this just really isn't as exciting as actually it does look as though it's descending there. I wonder what they did there. That's so creepy. The idea that pendulum, it's such a strong image. I could see why it's sort of cemented the fame of Edgar Allan Poe. Yeah, so one of the comparisons this movie sort of gets is that Lugosi is sort of like a Bond villain. What a delicious torture, bateman, greater than Poe. You're avenged. Yeah, he is sort of like that's a really, really good shot. The pendulum goes directly into the camera. But like I was saying, Lugosi is sort of the prototype for sort of the mad Bond villain. Obviously, you think of Goldfinger and how the laser moves in there. Yeah. There's another one I don't think I've ever seen actually work. It's sort of become a cliche in points. Obviously, it's so most famous in Star Wars, the walls coming together to crush somebody. Yeah, Lugosi, like I said, this movie doesn't have any sort of subtlety to it. And you have Lugosi go, I like to touch. There's another good moment with his hands stroking Karloff's face there.
She
Crushed to death. Yes. Yeah, Karloff's character becomes heroic at the end of the film. It's a good moment, and it's definitely, I think, a moment that goes in with sort of the character traits about the monsters, which I kind of like. The fact that monsters, you know, what's not interesting. I mean, what's interesting about them isn't the sort of the visceral horror of everything. It's more the men that they were, and you know, that's the redeeming factor of this character here, that he does the right thing. But you know, I don't know, like, I say this now, but you know, it's not really an appreciation of how things are going. You see Bateman put the knocked out Vollin in the crush room for his death, but you know what would have been so much better would have been had he strapped him into the pendulum there. Yeah, that thing should have cut him by now. And they're all sort of ducking under it, you know, sort of cavalierly, sort of, I don't know what you'd say there. Some of the effect is sort of lessened. Yeah, it's not consistent, either the pendulum or the crushing room, you know. The Colonel and his wife, we forgot the Colonel and his wife, and they're snoring peacefully. There's that great payoff that I was telling you would happen. And like all these films, it sort of ends with them driving away, you know, summarizing everything. Poor Bateman. That's the last line of the film. Yes, darling, he was crushed, saving us.
Only a little more gently.
So you're the big bad raven, huh?
So you're the big bad raven, huh? Yeah, like so many of those. That's like such a stereotypical epilogue ending of these films. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. It's a good film, and it's definitely a fun look at the Lugosi-Karloff dynamic. And, you know, just this one, just get to appreciate Lugosi a little more. And it's not the best of the Poe pictures, but there's a lot to appreciate about it. And definitely, I think the appreciation comes from Lugosi. It's a fun film, and I hope you guys enjoyed it, and we'll have some more commentaries for you on the way to Halloween. Until then, have a good one, and enjoy.